Do you want to know what it takes for a country to escape from poverty? Do you want to know what impoverished countries in Africa and the Americas and Asia have to do to develop their economies? Well, today on Visualeconomik, we're going to tell you all about it. We will tell you about countries that have succeeded or are succeeding in abandoning the extreme poverty on their own, and we'll explain two completely different formulas that are succeeding in eradicating poverty. So let's get cracking. I am sure that if you have studied or seen cases of economic success, most of them have been achieved thanks to capitalism, free competition, and openness to international markets. If you are already a veteran member of the Visual family, you'll remember that we ourselves have explained on several occasions the success of free market economies such as Estonia or Ireland. However, the first formula to get out of extreme poverty that we will talk about in this video is just the opposite. We will talk about how socialism, in spite of all its problems that many of you already know about, can bring a country out of the most extreme misery in the short to medium term. We are not talking about achieving wealth, but escaping from the most extreme poverty. And yes, I know this sounds different to what we would normally say here, especially for those of you watching from countries like Venezuela or Cuba, where socialism has had just the opposite effect of economic prosperity. But despite all this, take a look at this graph. What you are seeing right now is the evolution of the GDP per capita of the Bolivian economy from the 1980s to 2005. At that time, the Bolivian economy was completely underdeveloped. Its GDP per capita did not even reach $1,000 per year, while its inflation reached over 10,000%, and political instability was the daily grind of everyone in the country. That is to say, in Bolivia in the 1980s, political parties came and went. One year the right wing governed, the next year the left wing governed, but the bottom line is that it did not matter who governed because the economy continued to be an absolute disaster. However, wait just a moment, because in 2006, Bolivian politics took a 180-degree turn, a political turnaround that changed everything. In 2006, Evo Morales, one of the leading representatives of the so-called indigenous socialism and the first president with indigenous roots in the history of Bolivia, became president. As a good socialist, Evo Morales came to power determined to give much more influence to the state, including the nationalization of a large part of that country's economy. And that is exactly what he did. However, far from what you might be thinking, this process ended up causing an economic skyrocket. I mean, a whole economic takeoff. Just take a look at this. As you can see, after the Morales government came to power, Bolivia went from being a stagnant economy in ruins to the fastest growing economy in Latin America, more than tripling its GDP per capita in just 15 years. But take note, because although here we're speaking of socialism in the strict sense of the word, the truth is that the Bolivian nationalization process was not like that of the USSR or North Korea, where the government took control of the entire economy, but rather it was a process of light nationalization. You could say that it was low-calorie socialism, not communism, just a little bit of socialism. Now, what does that mean? What differentiated Bolivian socialism from Soviet socialism? Well, you see, we cannot really say that Bolivia became a socialist economy in the usual way. That is to say, the Bolivian government did not manage all sectors of the economy as the governments did in the USSR. In Bolivia, there is some room for capitalism, for markets, although they are much more regulated than in other capitalist countries. What the Bolivian government did as soon as it came to power was to nationalize certain sectors of the economy that were and are fundamental for the development of the country, even if it was only because of their capacity to generate income. We are talking about sectors such as oil, natural gas, and lithium. But take note, because the government not only limited itself to nationalizing these sectors, but also initiated a huge investment and development plan for them. Look at this graph. Using state resources, the Morales government massively boosted public investment in Bolivia's strategic sectors. As a result, between 2006 and 2018 alone, annual public investment increased almost threefold. As you can imagine, this huge strategic investment plan allowed the country to increase its production and thus rapidly increase national income and wealth. The fact is that in this way, the income obtained from the oil sector in Bolivia has multiplied almost 5 times in only 8 years since Morales came to power. Although, it must be said, during that time hydrocarbon prices set historical records. You could say that the Morales government had some luck, and the truth is that after the price drop around 2014, things started to go not as well. Be that as it may, and regardless of whether there was more or less luck involved, several independent studies that analysed the case of Bolivia found that these public investments contributed considerably to the country's economic takeoff. itself. To use concrete figures, economist Samuel Alarcón found that for every percentage point increase in Bolivian public investment, GDP increased by another 1% in the long term, which would serve to explain much of the country's recent development. But wait, let's just stop here for a moment. Although the petrochemical industry in Bolivia was an example of profitable public investment, the truth is that the Morales government itself carried out other types of investments that were an absolute disaster. For example, can you tell me which country in the world has the largest lithium reserves? Indeed, that country is none other than Bolivia. Bolivia has no less than 25% of the world's known lithium reserves. However, if we look at the countries with the highest lithium production in the world, Bolivia is nowhere to be seen. With 25%, Bolivia produces less than 1%, which if you think about it, is pretty ridiculous. Now the question is, why is this happening? Well, among other things, because the government of Evo Morales also nationalized its lithium industry back in 2006. However, unlike other investments such as oil, in this case the lithium investment was an absolute disaster. The government was completely incapable of developing and generating profitability with the businesses. Extraction projects are decades behind schedule, and so far, this sector has been completely paralyzed in the hands of the government, which has neither the experience nor the knowledge to move it forward. So although public investments can sometimes work out well, they are not a magic solution. In any case, a moment ago we told you that the MAS socialism of Morales and all of his pals is a light socialism, a socialism with a modest kindness to the markets. It turns out when Evo Morales came to power, he also wanted to boost the private economy, particularly the economy of small businessmen and entrepreneurs. To this end, he launched two interesting strategies. The first strategy consisted of developing public infrastructure such as roads, airports, and telecommunications networks. Something that, as you can imagine, can be very beneficial for trade and local economic activity, especially in countries where these are conspicuous by their absence. However, the most interesting strategy to boost the private market was the second one. Let me explain. In 2006, in countries like Bolivia, where misery and scarcity are paradoxically the daily bread, it turns out that the banking and financial system is not particularly developed either. However, in order to build companies from scratch or develop existing businesses, business owners and entrepreneurs need access to loans and investment to move their projects forward. But if there are no banks available, or if the few that are available have conditions or interest rates that are unacceptable, then companies have much less chance of succeeding. And that is something that Evo Morales' team had very much in mind. So in order to solve this issue, he carried out the banking reform of productive credits. Basically, these productive credits forced banks to give loans to entrepreneurs and companies with more advantageous conditions than usual. You know the kind of things. Lower interest rates, grace periods, better terms. In short, the flow of money to the productive economy was facilitated. And yes, I know what you're thinking. Forcing banks to lend in droves can end up being a huge problem. After all, we all remember what happened in the 2008 financial crisis. But in this case, as some economists such as Aldo Musacchio and Sergio Lazzarini take into account, it may make sense for the government to take an active role in sectors that are underdeveloped, as was the case of the Bolivian financial system, which may not function with as much competition and effectiveness as it can in developed economies, especially if we are talking about limited risks. Be that as it may, and having seen all this, I'm sure many of you are asking yourselves some questions. So, what are you telling us, Grant? Now it turns out that socialism works? Wasn't the key to getting out of poverty always capitalism? Does this mean that the free market no longer works? Well, not exactly. Let's not jump to any hasty conclusions, because before answering these questions, we first need to take a look at the second case study we have prepared for you in this video. So, let's take a look, comrades.
Indian liberalization.
Take a look at this image. Can you tell me who this man is? Well, it is none other than Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, the company that makes it possible for you to watch this video on YouTube right now. And do you know what Sundar's country of origin is? Indeed, as I'm sure many of you have guessed, it is India. India is known worldwide for its prodigies in mathematics and programming, to the point that, like Sundar Pichai, many of them have gone on to become the top managers in such important companies as Google, Twitter, Adobe, and Pepsi. The fact is that in recent years, India has become one of the fastest growing countries in the world, and some experts believe that in 30 years, it'll be the most dynamic economy on the planet. But what if we told you that this period of prosperity and growth was not always the case? What if we told you that just until a couple of decades ago, India was mired in constant, painful, and never-ending crises? Yes, after independence from the United Kingdom, instead of following the classic formulas of openness to the market and international trade so characteristic of the British, India adopted an economic model based on protectionism, economic interventionism, price controls, and basically everything that we already know does not usually work. In short, India was a fully fledged socialist country. The result was that year after year, India was running huge trade and fiscal deficits, had a very weak private sector due to high taxes, and the bureaucracy made entrepreneurship near impossible. The result? At that time, it became one of the poorest countries in the world. Even China, Mao's communist China, managed to tie and eventually overtake India economically. That's how badly they were doing. Or at least they were that bad until in 1991 when the big moment of change came. And it came thanks to this man. For those who don't know, this gentleman is Manmohan Singh, a finance minister and later Prime Minister of India who had a plan for his country. He wanted to turn India into a modern capitalist economy. To this end, he initiated a plan with three fundamental phases. Firstly, much of the administrative bureaucracy was eliminated to facilitate the creation of new businesses. The bureaucracy remained extensive, but somewhat less suffocating. That was a start. Secondly, the importation of machinery, which was previously restricted, was liberalized, so Indian companies could buy the best technology from international markets. And last, but not least, the entry of foreign investors into the country was facilitated to some extent, so that powerful companies from other countries could contribute to improving Indian economy. All of this caused the Indian economy, an economy that was mainly based on agriculture, to start developing high value-added sectors capable of generating income for the country and its workers. After the 1991 reform, industry and services became increasingly important for India's economic growth. And remember when we talked about programming at the beginning? Well, quite possibly, many of those great computer programmers are very grateful to Minister Singh's reforms because thanks to the new imports of foreign technology, there was a massive influx of computers into the country, something that allowed future Indian prodigies to train in computer science and today become among the best in the world. Now, in the face of all this, perhaps there are many of you who are wondering something else. Were all these reforms really responsible for India's economic growth, or was it just a product of luck or other measures that we have not mentioned? Ashok Kotwal, a recently deceased economist at the University of British Columbia, and his co-authors used a mathematical model to study what the growth of the Indian economy would have been under the old system and compared it with the Indian growth after the reforms. So what was the result? Well, as you can see, if India had continued with its old socialist model, it would have been much poorer today. The liberalization of its economy, even if partial, was enormously effective. Be that as it may, in this video we have presented two contradictory models. On the one hand, the Bolivian model based on state interventionism, socialism, and public spending. And on the other hand, the Indian model with liberalization, capitalism, and boosting the private sector. How is that possible? What is it that explains that two completely opposite models can help a country escape from misery? Well, let's find out.
Conclusions.
If we want to understand how it is possible that two totally opposite models can generate wealth, the first thing we have to take into account is the type of country in which each model is applied. And think about it, when we talk about extreme poverty, we are talking about countries that live on agriculture, almost as a feudal level. So as soon as new factories appear or there are new raw material exploitations or simply new computers, the production can skyrocket. The curious thing about all this is that these elements can actually be accumulated by both the government and the private sector. In Bolivia's socialist model, this capital accumulation was forced by the government using citizens' resources, either through taxes or expropriation, in order to invest in sectors such as oil or public infrastructure. But on the other hand, the capitalist model, although it may seem just the opposite, actually pursues the same objective. When bureaucracy is reduced and new companies are allowed to emerge in the country, what is sought is precisely to increase the accumulation of, you guessed it, capital. The big difference with the socialist model is that this capital accumulation is voluntary and is pursued through incentives to the private sector and not through expropriations or high taxes. Now, does this mean that in order to grow an economy, all you have to do is accumulate capital, set up factories, and buy machinery? Is this equivalent to saying that socialism could make a country rich? Well, I'm sorry, but not everything is that straightforward in life. As we have said, the accumulation of capital serves to get us out of extreme poverty. That is, it is very easy to set up relatively rudimentary factories or to open up to foreign investment. And it does not matter whether your model is socialist or capitalist if the only thing there is in that country is subsistence farming and agriculture. However, as a country gets richer, continuing to accumulate capital and workers is no longer of much use. What countries need after a certain point is for the factories they already have to be better. They need workers trained in good universities, engineers, physicists, mathematicians, efficient costs, and above all, they need ideas, adaptation to the market, and to develop their technology and innovation. And Visualeconomik viewers, this is exactly where many country models based on government interventionism, as for example seen so frequently in Latin America or even in the countries of the Southern Europe that have been stagnating for years, tend to reach their limits. Without innovative business models, without private initiative, and without competition, it is not possible to grow into a leading country. And if all of these elements are absent, a country may be able to escape extreme poverty, but that does not mean it will eventually achieve its full development. The question is, what can be done when it is not enough to generate wealth by accumulating more capital? What should countries such as those in Latin America or Southern Europe do to prosper? What are the keys to boosting innovation and development in countries that are stuck in an intermediate stage of wealth? Well, Visualeconomik viewers, we'll answer all of those questions in a video, in which we'll talk about how Israel became a technological superpower. But until then, the questions are over to you. What model would you choose for countries that are still stuck in poverty? Do you think Bolivia's success will be sustained over time? What other cases of countries that have overcome poverty do you know of? As always, you can leave us your answers in the comments below. If you like this video, please like it so we know, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and activate the little bell button down there so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. I hope you enjoyed it, all the best, and I'll see you next time.